Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, May 1st Jupyter IPython developers call. We're following an agenda on Dropbox paper, and we will go ahead and get started with updates on IPython.
That's me. Yeah, there's not a lot to report, but there is a bug that's currently causing the tests to fail related to Jedi completions. I just had a brief chat with Matthias, and he said that it may be a while before he has time to work on that. So I'll probably end up looking at it, but if anybody else has a bit of spare time to try and dig into that, we can probably just skip the test because we've disabled Jedi by default for the time being anyway. But that's currently kind of holding up merging pull requests and things. And that's all for IPython. The next section is Notebook, which is also me adding the notes. And I've opened a PR with some release notes for 5.5. And once those are merged, I'll try to put a release candidate out. It's actually quite a big release just because quite a lot of stuff has accumulated since we last did a release. So I think it's worth having a release candidate so that people can find some of the bugs before we put it out and find more bugs.
Okay. And I'm not sure, I can't see on the Dropbox, unfortunately, who typed in some notes for Jupyter Lab. I'm going to assume that was Jason, but...
Yeah, I've got some.
Okay, go ahead.
We released Jupyter Lab 0.32.1 with several bug fixes, including one or two sort of more major bug fixes, fixing scrolling and outputs and things like that. There's ongoing work to refactor sort of at a deeper level how document widgets work and to make top-level widgets more consistent across Jupyter Lab. For example, make it very easy for every component to have toolbar, consistent toolbar, etc. There's also a lot of feedback piling up from people using widgets, and some of that feedback contributors are also pushing forward into pull requests that are being worked on. And there's a couple of talks going out about Jupyter Lab. I think Jessica's giving a tutorial at CERN, and a few other talks that are sort of on the horizon about Jupyter Lab.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jason.
Do you want me to talk about IPyWidgets?
Go ahead.
Okay. Things have been fairly quiet on the IPyWidgets front. There's not been a lot of core development with IPyWidgets. However, there's been a decent amount of activity in other libraries that are based on IPyWidgets. For example, IPyLeaflet has been having steady activity. We did move IPyLeaflet over to the Jupyter Widgets organization, and we'll probably move several other libraries over to the Jupyter Widgets organization to bring it under one umbrella. These would be the libraries that that the core developers for IPyWidgets are developing. Just pull them all into the same umbrella. So that's it for IPyWidgets. However, you probably want to ask Darian and Grant if they have more Jupyter Lab stuff, or even Nick. Nick was working on Jupyter Lab.
I don't have anything to contribute this week.
Yeah, nothing significant here as well.
Yeah, the iframe thing, it would be good to see that come to a head. There is the outstanding task to do some review of the different implementations, because fragmentation is probably bad of how that works. So I might take a crack at that, looking at having now written that a couple times for various folks, how to clean that up.
Nick's being modest. He also completely rewrote our Conda Forge package, which took care of a ton of bugs and instituted much more rigorous testing, which really helped us. And he's also been working on the offline installation story that several people are really really trying to crack that story of how do you deal with offline extension installation and Mixbit, tackling that.
Yeah, at some point we gotta slow down on the upgrading of the yarn, because I feel like that's going to be the biggest whammy in terms of how that end of it works. And then on some other stuff, I am looking at the run your own damn npm registry thing, and I don't like it much at all. There is not a good simple way to do it, just from a directory of files or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's probably worth trying the approach as well, because now we've got a real user that's like, I'm trying to use Jupyter Lab at work and I can't. And it's like, I know, man, I know. So yeah, we'd like to nail some of those things, but yeah. Let's see, but still haven't had any progress on getting the robot kernel stuff moving forward. But have started using it, and I think that's going to be a really approachable way for people to test things that run on top of Jupyter. So especially lab. So I do kind of look forward to, after I've kind of shaken some of the rust off some of the ideas in there, if we end up with a robot framework Jupyter plugin that would be generally usable for developers to test their stuff against different things. So whether we adopt it on the project itself, I don't know, but there's probably some value into extracting some of the test knowledge that we're gaining in the Selenium rework, and wrapping it up into something that people can write and test requirements against, which is pretty fun. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nick. Looks like Jupyter Hub is planning for a release this week and conference proposal. Any other updates on Jupyter Hub? I don't think Min or Carol are on the call, but anything to add from anyone? If not, we'll move on to, I unfortunately can't see who typed those notes into the other project miscellaneous, so probably Thomas.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've been working for a while on replacement packages for Jupyter Client. As I've mentioned in previous meetings, the idea is to split up the functionality of Jupyter Client into two pieces, which I'm calling Jupyter Protocol and Jupyter Kernel Management. And those APIs, which are currently in packages under my own name on GitHub, they're not by any means stable yet, but they're kind of reaching the point where they're doing useful things for me, and now it would be useful for other people to try playing around with them, seeing what rough edges there still are, and like what we should try and do before we solidify them. I'm still very unsure about how all of the async stuff works or should work. Like, my idea was to have a fully sort of parallel stack of things that you could do in blocking operations or in async operations. But if you do it fully parallel, then you have a lot of duplicated code. So at the moment, there's bits where the async stuff is a subclass of the synchronous stuff, and there's bits where the synchronous stuff is a wrapper around the async stuff. And then I read a blog post Nathaniel wrote about Trio and thought that maybe we should do all the async stuff like that. Oh God, I don't know. But yeah, I've also posted a couple of links to example packages that I've written based on top of those APIs. So Jupyter SSH kernels is a kernel provider that you can configure to start kernels on remote systems that you have SSH access to. And it's all very, very manual. Like you set up what IP address to SSH to and what arguments to run on that thing to start the kernel. And similarly, Jupyter Docker kernels is a thing to launch kernels inside Docker containers, so one kernel per container. And that actually turns out to be quite neat to do with the Docker Python APIs. That worked quite well, I think.
Could you say a bit about how the Jupyter kernel management differs from the Jupyter kernel manager as it currently exists and the Jupyter kernel spec manager? Because if you're providing these, it sounds like you might also be generating kernel specs on the fly or something.
Yeah, so my idea is, so both the kernel manager and the kernel spec manager, which are classes in Jupyter Client at the moment, there are classes with the same names inside Jupyter kernel management. Kernel spec manager hasn't been changed much. Kernel manager has been changed quite a bit. That has quite a bit less functionality in the new package than it did in Jupyter Client. So in Jupyter Client, kernel manager was responsible for starting kernels and for shutting them down. In Jupyter kernel management, the kernel manager object is, it sort of gets it's a wrapper around a running kernel to do the sort of things that you can do with direct access to a process, like sending it an interrupt signal or killing it forcibly. But there's a separate machinery to launch it before it goes into the kernel manager, and there's the shutdown, sort of nice shutdown, is part of the client functionality, because that involves sending a message and waiting for a reply.
So there's a Jupyter Client, a class now exists inside Jupyter kernel management as well. So that's now the sort of three pieces that you've gotten, where client is holding the startup and the shutdown, the nice shutdown, and then kernel spec manager is doing basically the same thing. And we have an emaciated version of the kernel manager to only handle stuff with processes. Is that more or less correct?
Yes, more or less. A couple of other changes. So the client isn't responsible for startup at all. There's a separate kernel launcher that handles the startup. The client really just deals with the messaging and communications, and the client still wraps a manager. And there's also it also includes kind of a rough prototype of the stuff that we've been calling a kernel nanny, which is basically a kernel manager exposed as a 0MQ service. So then there's another thing called manager client, just to further confuse matters, which is a wrapper object for talking to a kernel nanny, so that you can do kernel manager-like things without having a direct access to the kernel manager.
Could you say that again? Sorry, I'm having a little difficulty following all those pieces.
Yeah, I know. It's we run out of good names to call these things.
So does it, does this suite of things, does it run yet? I mean, obviously you're able to do something with it. Could you gen up a binder or something where we could see how this actually would work? Or is it not to that stage yet?
It wouldn't. I don't think it would. I don't think you could run a binder using this. Like, we could sort of potentially install this in parallel inside a binder and like have notebooks to play with the APIs. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure how useful that would be.
Well, if you're thinking that we're getting to the point where people can start playing around with it, do you want to maybe write up a quick tutorial, not necessarily in a notebook or anything, but just it's going to walk through what all of these different parts are and what kinds of things people would want to explore in the API.
Yeah, that's a good
'cause
idea.
I was trying to write down the notes as you were talking, but there's a lot there. And you never actually said, so what's specific in the Jupyter protocol package now?
So that's all the definitions of the message types and the sockets and things. So the idea is, because at the moment Jupyter client is used by the kernel as well as the actual client. So the idea
The actual
is
client
that,
being the client app, the command line app.
yeah, any application that talks to a kernel is a client in that sense. So yeah, the idea would be that the Jupyter protocol component would be used by both sides of the messaging communication, and the Jupyter kernel management would only need to be used by stuff that was accessing and talking to kernels, but not by the kernel itself.
Yeah, having the protocol on its own package sounds awesome. I mean, having NB format like that has been really great for, what is the thing? What do you do? Well, it's down inside here. So that sounds really positive for people that are trying to build other stuff that ties in with it. And if there's testing stuff that can be part of that as well,
That's what I was just going to ask.
Whatever, but
does the Jupyter protocol have a set of easy plugin tests so that someone could say, hey, I've implemented a client that is going to implement this protocol. Here's a bunch of messages that try to meet what this is. Does it succeed?
So at the moment, no. Part of my planning with Jupyter Protocol, and I think it's a bit that I haven't got to yet, is that in the Jupyter kernel test package, I have a load of JSON schema objects to validate messages against, and I plan to move those into Jupyter Protocol and have Jupyter kernel test rely on that, and then it should hopefully make sense to have a way for the client, a way to do the same kind of message validation testing against the client as we currently do against different kernels.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. I'm going to add that to the notes then, because even if you haven't been working a lot on that lately, that seems directly relevant to this.
Please do, yes. And thank you for trying to turn this kind of stream of words that says manager and client a lot into some kind of coherent notes.
Happy to do my part.
Oh, one thing, so back on Jupyter Lab, we landed a bunch of stuff into the Jupyter Lab GraphViz, which is still unreleased. Somebody else was working on it, but on that for extension folk, I figured out a way to force Webpack to put all of your dependencies in another bundle that can be lazily loaded. Because GraphViz, it's just an mscript in GraphViz, so it's like 2 megabytes of, whatever nonsense. And that pattern might be something that we want to document for people with extensions going forward, because wow, the build sizes are getting big enough to where if you do a production build, you will run out of heap space on the node VM when you are trying to do uglification or source map processing or something like that. So totally out of the stream of consciousness, but it got me thinking about that.
If
anyway,
you want
some GraphViz of how these things fit together would be nice. Is what the tangent is there.
If you want another big unwieldy package that you might want to play with to see how to abstract across this pattern, you could look at the PDF.js stuff that we have in the Jupyter LaTeX. Because that is gigantic and messy and old code.
And it's like MPL, isn't it?
I don't think so. I thought it was just really old JavaScript.
No, it's patch 2. It's patch 2. It's cool.
Nick, we do the same thing in IPyWidgets.
Oh, you're already on that? All right.
All our controls are loaded into a separate Webpack bundle that's lazily loaded.
Yeah, well, we should hoist the knowledge of that, because we're doing ourselves a great disservice if, like, load time, kills me. If we can get out of that land.
All right. Anything else that is not on the agenda before we move on to just some highlights from conferences and closing out the meeting? Last chance.
I still have, I know this won't happen before 5.5, but on Notebook, I still have that configuration, like custom configuration conversion stuff from a year ago that needs some review, if anybody, because it's just been through so many iterations now that if anyone wants to take a stab at that, it'd be great.
Was that the configuration for NB-convert thing?
The thing where you can upload a custom configuration file, which I noticed that a bunch of people are asking for over the past few weeks on like the mailing list and stuff like that. So yeah, I still want to see it in there, and I just don't know what we need to do at this point to make sure it's good enough to be in. Sorry,
Yeah, I
not good
should
enough.
get
Perfect.
back and
The best it can be.
Is that an open PR right now?
It's been an open PR since April 14th last year.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a look at it today.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So just a few reminders on JupyterCon. We have the registration is open right now. Best pricing will end May 18th. We're also offering student scholarships again this year, and I've put a link into the agenda to the Google form for those applications. Those are due June 16th. As far as conferences and workshops, just a reminder to always add any events that you hear about that might be of interest to the community onto this list. If you have anything to add, please insert that there. We have Carol is out at KubeCon right now in Copenhagen. She's on a panel, on several panels for that event. And also Peter Parenti will be speaking at the Jupyter pop-up, which is in DC on May 25th. That's an event that O'Reilly, Jupyter, and NumFocus are partnering together to present at the end of this month. Also, if you come across any open calls for proposals or speaking opportunities, please add those onto this list so that we share those opportunities with everyone. And I am going to, anything else anyone would like to highlight, places they're speaking or any additional details on what's already on this list?
I just added that the Binder 2.0 talk will be happening at SciPy. So
okay.
People should all come and see that.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Em. And last thing, I'm going to skip over the YouTube comment section. I still haven't resolved that, so I'm just going to skip over that for now. I think we've copied over all the release notes from this week or last week and anything that's coming up soon, but if you have anything else to add on there, please document any releases at the very end of the agenda. And with that, we will go ahead and close out. Thanks for participating, and I hope you all have a great week.
Thanks, Anna. Bye all.
Bye.